Thank you all for coming out. We will be here all First Fridays. We have these talks on First Fridays, and the idea behind them is to process our world, process our church, process how we are called to live in this world and to be Catholics and to infect our culture. And there's no greater fight in our culture than the pro-life movement. We've been doing this since forever. Since the very first years, very first decades, very first writings of the church, we have been talking about this subject. And the fathers of the church, Tertullian, the Didache, it's amazing how present they were to this issue. And they won, right? They won for centuries, right? Abortion was not a thing for probably more than a millennia after the Christian fight. And when you read their works and you realize how aware they were of what they were talking about, of the issues of the day, this is literally like 120, like the year 120. And they're talking about this in great detail and what it means. I mean, you talk to Tertullian and he talks about, for example, all right, is this being alive? And he addresses women, and he says, women, which is in you, is that you moving, or that something else moving? And says, and more to the point, if it stops moving, isn't that your greatest concern, not for yourself, but for that other being in your womb? So they knew the fight, they knew what they were talking about from the very first days, and they were victorious. And we can be victorious as well. And we have Steve Karlen here, who's in the fight. And he's going to remind us all about how it's all of our fight. So thank you very much for being here. He is an author. He wrote, amongst other things, What to Say When. So look at his books. Look at them on Amazon and elsewhere. And it's a great gift to have him here. So Steve, thank you so much for being here. You're a gift to our diocese, you're a gift to this area, you're a gift to the movement. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Father, and thank you to all of you. I want to start out by saying thank you because I'm pretty sure you're all busy people. None of you came tonight because you were bored and didn't have anything to do with your time. You could be doing a lot of other things, but you're here coming to a pro-life talk to stand up and to serve the least of our brothers and sisters, the unborn babies and the moms who are in danger of abortion. So I thank you for being here, and I'd like to continue, if I may, by telling you a little bit about why I'm here. And I suppose in one sense it's kind of obvious, right? You wanted a pro-life talk, and so I'm here because I'm pro-life, just like all of you. But even though I've always been pro-life, there's not a point in my life where I've ever been anything other than pro-life. For much of my life, I never did anything about it. And I don't know if that's because I was lazy. I don't know if it's because I didn't know what I could do to make a difference, but for one reason or another, I never acted on that conviction that I held in my heart that every human life is sacred, every human life is precious, every single human life needs to be actively defended. And my lack of involvement began to change really one day back when my wife Laura and I were newlyweds. We lived in Chicago, and as I arrived to work one morning, I got a text message from my new bride. That should have been my first sign that something was up. My wife Laura hated sending text messages. She didn't even like to receive them. This was back in the day where if you wanted to type the letter S, it was like 7777. She wanted no part of it, so she didn't even like to get these messages. And when I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw that it was Laura, sure enough, there was something wrong. My wife was texting me to let me know that one of her friends, a young woman named Jessica, with whom she spoke pretty much every day, Jessica had reached out to her that morning and shared that she was pregnant. But don't worry about it, she said. She was going to take care of it. She was going to get an abortion. To make matters worse, pretty much everybody in her life told her that was the right decision. They said, you've got to look out for yourself. You've got to look out for your future. Don't let anybody try to tell you this is some kind of a moral decision. Now, my wife Laura at the time was not actually pro-life herself. At the time, she would have described herself as pro-choice. It's not so much that she was radically or militantly pro-abortion, not by any means, but I think she had swallowed that big lie that so many in our culture had, which is, well, I wouldn't get an abortion, but it's not my place to tell someone else what to do with her life, with her body, with her future. You've heard it all before. I think part of that is she had never, perhaps out of a willful ignorance or not, I'm not sure, but she had never encountered this crisis of abortion. But here in her friend Jessica, my wife, was for the very first time face to face with the crisis of abortion, and she had an instant conversion. And I'm so proud of the way that my wife responded, because she woke up that morning considering herself pro-choice, and just hours later found herself offering Jessica whatever love and help and support and encouragement that Jessica might need to choose life and to get through this pregnancy and to thrive beyond it. Laura offered to let Jessica move in with us and live with us rent-free to escape the pressure that she was getting from her child's father, her live-in ex-boyfriend, who wanted her to have an abortion. Laura offered financial support if it was financial constraints or concerns that were driving Jessica toward this abortion decision. Laura offered her financial support. Laura offered, even as she was 8 months pregnant with our first son, Peter, Laura offered to adopt Jessica's baby and to raise that child as our own if that's what it would take to give her the courage that she needed to make a life decision. And that love, that help, that support, that encouragement, it made a difference. And we know that it does, because we hear the studies, we know the research, we hear that upwards of 80% of women who have suffered the trauma of abortion will say later after the fact that if one person, just a single person, reached out a helping hand and encouraged them to choose life, 80% say that they would have chosen life. And so for Jessica, my wife Laura was that one person. And Jessica went from looking up the names of abortion providers in downtown Chicago to looking up the names of babies. And she decided she would keep her baby, and she would parent her child, and she would name her baby Michaela. And we were so excited. We were so excited by this life saved. We were so thrilled that we had the opportunity to play some small role in this life saved. Above all, we were thrilled for Jessica and for her baby and for this new mother-child relationship that, even in less than ideal circumstances, was at last beginning to take root, if you will, and to blossom. And so it was about that time that we scheduled a dinner with Jessica one Friday evening after work in downtown Chicago. We got to the restaurant and Jessica wasn't there. Her phone was turned off. She didn't return our calls. We couldn't reach her. We thought, you know what, she's pregnant. Maybe she's not feeling well. Or maybe we had a confusion on the date or the time. We had dinner without her and figured, you know what, sooner or later we'll figure out where we got our lines crossed here. And we did. 2 days later, Sunday morning, we woke up, we went to Mass, we came home, we had some lunch. We were just starting to clear the table and wash the dishes, and that's when Laura's phone rang. She answered it. It was Jessica. Jessica was sobbing, almost hysterically. It turns out that while we were waiting for Jessica at the restaurant that Friday evening, at that very moment, she was having her abortion. She had been able to withstand the pressure that she had gotten from her boyfriend, from her friends, from her coworkers, even from her own parents who wanted her to abort their grandchild. But when she got that same pressure from her doctors, that's what broke her. She gave in, she had the abortion, and now here she was on the phone, heartbroken, devastated, never to be the same. In my own very different way, I was heartbroken and devastated. And in my own way, I would never be the same, because it's that moment where I recognized it wasn't enough for me to just be pro-life. I had to do something about it. And I promised myself right then and there that from that moment on, whatever I could do to prevent even one more life from being lost, even one more heart from being broken by this crisis of abortion, that I would do it. And so that, my friends, that in a nutshell is why I'm here tonight. But I think in a very real sense, it's why we're all here tonight, to do what we can to prevent even one more life from being lost, even one more heart like Jessica's from being broken by abortion. We're here because we've got a problem. And not just a problem, but as I've been saying, a crisis that is deadly, a crisis that is devastating families, a crisis that threatens even the very fabric of the communities that we live in and that we work in. And that crisis, of course, is the crisis of abortion. And if you're taking the time to come out to a pro-life talk on a perfectly good Friday night, you might know some of the numbers. Some of you might know that in the last 49 plus years in the United States of America, we've lost 63 million children to abortion. We've made progress in the pro-life movement, driving the abortion rate down, but we're still losing about a million children to abortion each and every year in our country. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around numbers on that scale. I can't imagine what 63 million children looks like, what 63 million of anything looks like. I certainly can't even imagine what 1 million looks like. So to put it in perspective, if you're like me and can't wrap your minds around those numbers, that means that here in the United States of America, the wealthiest civilization that our world has ever known, the land of the free, the home of the brave, here in our country, a little boy or little girl loses his or her life to abortion about every 30 seconds in our country. Abortion is the third leading cause of death in the state of Wisconsin. It's the leading cause of death in our country. It's the leading cause of death in our world, taking more lives, ending more human lives than all other causes of death combined. And it's not even close, frankly. I share this with you not because I want to, after dinner, bore you to death with a statistics lesson, but I do think it's important for us to at least do what we can to try to wrap our minds, to try to grasp the scope and the scale and the magnitude of this crisis. Abortion is not just a political issue that we can kick out to our lawmakers in Madison or in Washington, D.C. It's not just a social issue, whatever that term means. This is the greatest human rights crisis that our world has ever known. But you and I in this chapel here tonight, this beautiful chapel, I think we know that the women getting abortions are not statistics. They're not numbers, they're not facts, they're not figures. They're our friends. They're our family members. They're our coworkers, our neighbors, the people we go to school with, and yes, even in some cases, the people who we go to church with are getting abortions. We're out standing in prayer in front of the abortion facility, and we see the Jesus bumper sticker. We see the rosary hanging down from the rearview mirror. It intersects our life. We've got all of these abortions, and of course, you know we've got the baby whose life is lost, but you've also got a mother scarred. You've got a father wounded. You've got 4 grandparents who will never hold that grandchild. You've got aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, surviving and future siblings. We have an entire world, an entire society that has been hurt by abortion, directly or indirectly, but nevertheless hurt by this crisis of abortion. And it's those women, men, and children who bring us together for a pro-life talk on a Friday night. About 6 months after Jessica had her abortion, I encountered 40 Days for Life for the first time. And I just want to get a sense, show of hands if you would, how many of you are familiar with or have at least heard of 40 Days for Life? Okay, most of you, that's great. If you don't know about it, I'll give you a little recap. Even if you do know about it, maybe the recap is helpful. 40 Days for Life is an internationally coordinated campaign that aims to end abortion through 3 components. The first is 40 days of prayer and fasting. Pretty basic, right? Hopefully the foundation of all that we do as people of faith. 40 days of community outreach to educate the public on the tragic reality of abortion in our midst. And I think that's important because if you take a look at the state of abortion in our country, the fact that abortion is legal all 9 months of pregnancy, it's legal in all 50 states. You take a look at the fact that abortion is the most commonly performed surgical procedure in our country. You look at the fact that abortion is funded by our tax dollars at the federal, state, and local level. It would be easy to look at the circumstances on the ground and to conclude that we've lost the debate over abortion. But I don't think it's so much that we've lost the debate over abortion. I think it's that we've never had an opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about it. Case in point, over the last 12 or so years, we have seen states across the country, as well as certain elected officials in Congress, introduce legislation to defund Planned Parenthood. And you will see Planned Parenthood and its allies in the media and its allies in the political world will come out and they'll say, well, look, Americans are opposed to defunding Planned Parenthood. We've got the polling research right here. Can you see poll after poll after poll shows Americans want to fund Planned Parenthood? And that's true. They're not lying about that. But they're not telling the whole truth either. Because if you look a little bit more closely at those polls, a majority of Americans doesn't know that Planned Parenthood does abortions. We're talking about the leading abortion provider in our country, operates more than half of the abortion facilities in the country. Most Americans don't know they do abortion, so of course they're going to be opposed to defunding something that purports to be women's health care. Another example, we've got this case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which could, for the our best chance in 30 years to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion. And that decision is expected to be released in June. And as we get closer to June, if you haven't seen it already, you will see the abortion industry and its allies trumpeting, again, polling research, a mountain of polling data showing that a majority of Americans opposes overturning Roe v. Wade. Again, that polling research is true, but it doesn't tell the whole story. When you look a little bit more closely, you see that a majority of Americans don't even know what Roe v. Wade is. I saw one survey in particular where I don't know if it was a majority, but it was at least the plurality, the leading answer of what Roe v. Wade was about, was people thought it was about racial segregation in our schools. All of that is to say we've got a lot of community outreach to be done. So 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of community outreach, 40 days of peaceful prayer vigil, praying all day, every day in front of the facilities where abortions are performed and where they're bought and sold. And this started in Texas. It's since then the world came knocking and it's gone worldwide. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I first encountered 40 Days for Life 6 months after Jessica's abortion, when the first ever of these nationally coordinated 40 Days for Life campaigns was getting set to kick off in 89 cities in 33 states across our country. And in one of those cities, Aurora, Illinois, where my wife and I were then living, Planned Parenthood was putting the finishing touches on one of the first of its abortion mega centers. These abortion facilities that are gigantic, designed to end the lives of unborn children in greater numbers and with greater efficiency than anything the Western world has ever seen before. Now, I couldn't get involved in that first 40 Days for Life campaign. I had a newborn, and I was in the process of moving my family up to Wisconsin, where we now live and continue to live all these years later. So I couldn't get involved, but I watched from a distance. And from that distance, I saw how through these 40 days, hundreds of pro-lifers took to the streets to peacefully pray. How a pro-life community that in many ways was asleep at the wheel was suddenly awakened. We saw how those prayers and that witness even managed to delay the opening of that abortion facility for a stretch of time. And so when we got up here to Wisconsin, when we completed our move up to Madison, we got involved in the next year's 40 Days for Life campaign. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't know if I quite recognized just what I had gotten into on day one of my first 40 Days for Life campaign. But if I didn't know on day one, I very quickly figured it out on day two, when my wife, Laura, was out praying her scheduled hour of prayer in front of the abortion facility. She was approached by a young man named Ed. And all these years later, I still can't even begin to imagine the degree of pain and heartache that it must have taken to move this man, Ed, to share his story with my wife, a complete stranger. But Ed told my wife how recently he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. He wanted the baby, she wanted an abortion. They argued about it, she broke up with him, she stole his credit card, she used that credit card to pay for her abortion, and then to pour salt on the open wound, to twist the knife, if you will, in the wake of their broken relationship, she mailed him the sonogram image of his aborted child. It's the worst that our world has to offer, and it broke our hearts. But it also made it a very easy decision when toward the end of those 40 days, we were approached by our volunteer local 40 Days for Life leader, a woman named Amy. And Amy told us that after the 40 days ended, she was going to be getting married. She said that she and her new husband would be relocating to a new community, and so she needed somebody to fill her shoes, somebody to step up and to volunteer to lead the next year's 40 Days for Life campaign. Would we be the ones to do it? I said, yes, absolutely, of course. No questions asked. It was a no-brainer. We didn't have to think twice. And I remember telling my wife how excited I was to lead the 40 Days for Life campaign, how honored and yet humbled I was that we would have this opportunity to serve in such a capacity. But at the same time, I said, 40 Days for Life is hard. 40 Days for Life is challenging. It is difficult to go out and to pray day after day after day in front of an abortion facility, to watch those moms walk in pregnant, and then to witness them walk back out of that building no longer pregnant, usually crying, often limping, physically, spiritually, emotionally broken. It is difficult to put in the administrative legwork that's required to find enough volunteers to pray all day, every day for 40 straight days in front of an abortion facility. So I said, I'm glad we can do this, but I'm really glad we have until next year before we have to do it. Whenever I share this story, I'm reminded of this old Yiddish proverb. Maybe you've heard of it. It suggests that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Because here I was laying out my vision for this nice long break after the 40 Days for Life ended. I had no idea what was about to happen. The Lord certainly did. What happened next is this. The following month, I got a call from an attorney named Matt Bowman. I had no idea who this guy was, never heard of him before. But he called me and he introduced himself as a pro-life, pro-family attorney representing a Christian legal organization, legal advocacy organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom. He told me that he was calling me because he learned that I was the new leader of the 40 Days for Life group in Madison. He dropped the names of some mutual friends to establish his credibility. And then he dropped the bombshell on me. He told me that the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I went to school, where my wife went to school, where we met and fell in love, I loved the University of Wisconsin. But this guy, Matt Bowman, who I never heard of in my life, told me that my alma mater was in the late stages of secretly preparing to open up a late-term abortion center right on the heart of our college campus. We're talking about abortions that are so gruesome and so brutal that they're not even legal in most of secular post-Christian Europe. In fact, the United States is one of just a small handful of countries on the entire planet that allow these gruesome late-term abortions. We're talking about countries like the US and Canada, Vietnam, the People's Republic of China, and North Korea. My friends, when we find ourselves as a society on a human rights list right in between China and North Korea, it is a sure sign that something has gone dramatically wrong. Now, Matt Bowman told me that the university was deliberately keeping this late-term abortion plan secret to prevent any sort of a public outcry or backlash. But he told me he was about to end that. Within the week, he and his organization were going to issue a major announcement exposing and blowing the lid off of this plan. And he asked me if, for my part, as the leader of the local 40 Days for Life campaign, would I be willing to rally our community, our pro-life community, within maybe a day or two of his announcement for a peaceful, prayerful demonstration in front of the building where these abortions were due to take place. I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do whatever I can to help, but I'm new at this, and I want to make sure it's worth everybody's while. How many people do we need to have this be worthwhile? I don't want to show up with like 3 people and it looks like weak sauce, right? How many people do we need to have to make this a useful effort? He said, you think you can get maybe like 20 or maybe even 25 people out? I told him I'd do my best, and we got off the phone, and I realized I had a little problem on my hands, namely that I had no idea what in the world I was doing. How do you rally the pro-life community on just 48 hours notice, on a work day, a school day, a location with next to no parking, and oh, by the way, the second week of January here in Wisconsin? Now, I shared this story on Sunday in San Antonio, and I don't think they quite recognize what the second week of January in Wisconsin is about, but I know all of you do. It was cold. In fact, it was the coldest day, I think, of that year. And when the wind chills plunged far below zero, I began to have some serious doubts that anybody was going to be crazy enough to come out and join us at that demonstration that morning. But our Lord is faithful, and our Lord is powerful. We didn't have 20 or 25 people. Instead, we had hundreds of people all up and down the street, both sides of the street, wrapped around the corner, singing, praying, praising God, witnessing to the inherent and intrinsic dignity of every human life to our largely godless city that morning. The newspaper reporters were there, television cameras, statewide radio. That event that was scheduled to last just 1 hour was still going strong more than 2 hours later. And I was so excited to go home and to call my loved ones from out of town and tell them just what our Lord had accomplished in our city that morning. And we were thrilled again when we turned on the news and saw that our little rally that I thought nobody was going to show up to was the lead story on the nightly television news broadcast. But as that day wound down, you kind of have that letdown at the end of something exciting. I found myself growing increasingly reflective, contemplative, you might say. I was haunted, might be the best word. I found myself haunted by one of the faces in particular that I had met that morning on the street. It was a young girl. She was probably, I'd say, about 6 years old. I think she looked about the same age as my oldest daughter right now. And she greeted me with just the biggest, most beautiful smile that I think I've ever seen in my life. A smile that warmed my heart that morning. A smile that I think warmed a lot of hearts on that very cold day. So the obvious question probably is, right, Steve, why in the world did you find yourself haunted by the memory of this beautiful little girl's smiling face? And the answer to that question is because even in spite of how bundled up she was for the cold weather that morning, I very quickly recognized that my young friend had Down syndrome. Some of you might know where I'm going with this, that here in the Western world, the supposedly civilized Western world, of all children diagnosed in the womb with Down syndrome, upwards of 90% lose their lives to abortion. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that CBS issued a glowing report on the progressive paradise of Iceland because they managed to eradicate Down syndrome from their country, when all they really did was manage to exterminate the people with Down syndrome in their country. And so I was considering these factors, and I couldn't help but to stop and to think that for every beautiful smiling face like this little girl I met on the sidewalk, there were 9 more who should be with us, but were not, lost their lives before they had that opportunity to draw their first breath. And once again, I felt we were face to face with the tragic reality of this abortion crisis, and it served as a little bit of a wake-up call. I couldn't just celebrate that we had a big day. I couldn't just celebrate that we were on TV. I had to get back to work. The media gave us one day, but the next day I knew it would be back to business as usual. Stock market reports, basketball scores, and the University of Wisconsin would be left free and unencumbered in waging war on abortion-vulnerable moms and babies. So the next day we got back to work. This time we organized another rally, a march, and a rally through downtown Madison. We flew out Sean Carney, the co-founder of 40 Days for Life, to give our keynote address. Sean brought his friend, Dr. Haywood Robinson, a former abortion provider who shared his beautiful conversion testimony. And we saw thousands of people converge upon Madison for what I later learned is probably the biggest pro-life event that this state had seen in 25 years before that. Now, the University of Wisconsin did not back down in the face of this massive public outcry. Just a few days later, the UW Health Authority Board gathered together for a public meeting where they would discuss, deliberate, and vote on whether to proceed with this gruesome late-term abortion scheme. It was open to the public. I was there. Maybe some of you were there. And at the end of the night, they voted 11-3 to proceed with these gruesome late-term abortions. As I drove home that night, I was devastated. I was so saddened. My heart was so heavy. As I drove home, I got a call from this old Army chaplain who I had met just a few weeks earlier at that cold weather rally that we had that I just told you about. And this old Army chaplain, very eccentric man, very hard to understand, but he called me up and he said, "Steve, how'd it go tonight?" I'm just filled with self-pity. I muttered something about, well, we lost. I'll never forget the old man's reply. His rebuke caught me off guard. He said, "Of course you lost. You haven't been at this pro-life work very long, have you? This is when we begin to fight." And so the day after that vote was finalized, I was inspired by this old Army chaplain. I was interviewed by the local news in my driveway, and the reporter said something to the effect of, "Well, you guys lost. What you gonna do now?" And I said, "We're not going anywhere." I said, "We're going to continue to show up and to pray in front of this building until this evil plan is canceled once and for all." Now, as the words are coming out of my mouth, I'm thinking my inner monologue is, "Steve, what in the world are you committing to here? You might be writing a check that you can't cash. You don't know if this is going to be years. Maybe it's going to be decades. How are you going to do it?" But we made a promise, and we intended to keep that promise. Day after day, week after week, month after month, we continued on a pretty much everyday basis, showing up to pray and witness in front of that would-be abortion facility. Some days we'd have 100 or 200 people out on the streets. Most of the time we'd have 1 or 2 people out on the streets. But we just kept coming. And the Lord responded to our prayers because that abortion facility that was scheduled to open that winter was delayed until spring. Spring became summer, became fall, became January. Suddenly we had gone an entire calendar year. Not a single abortion had been performed. As many as 125 had been prevented. And we were thankful and we were praising God for these victories. But at the same time, I could see trouble on the horizon. I knew what the university was up to. They were trying to wait us out, just delay, try to wait us out. How much longer would it be realistic to think that I would be able to rally people to show up and to pray in front of an abortion facility that wasn't even performing abortions? And yet I knew that if we packed up and went home, that would give the University of Wisconsin exactly what it was looking for. And under the cover of our absence, they'd be able to swoop in and begin performing these late-term abortions. I needed to find a way to break the stalemate. But every idea I had, every trick up my sleeve just wasn't enough. And that's when my wife said, "Steve, I've got an idea." She said, "I think we need to lead an extra 40 Days for Life campaign." You see, 40 Days for Life happens twice a year. It happens in the fall, and there's also what they call a spring campaign, which takes place during Lent. Now, I'm convinced that there's no such thing as a spring campaign. Only a couple of guys in Texas could think of February and early March as spring. So I said, there's no way. There's no way we'll be able to pull it off. We've been riding our volunteers so hard for more than a year. We had just gotten off of a very difficult 40 Days for Life campaign at the Madison Planned Parenthood in which it rained, snowed, or hailed 21 of 40 days. We had been riding our volunteers hard. There was no parking. It was going to be brutally cold. And we had done, up until that point, we had done the fall 40 Days for Life campaign. And yeah, we stay active in between, but we've gone 15 straight falls 24 hours around the clock without missing an hour, but doing the spring one just seemed like a little too much. So I told my wife, it'll never work. What's plan B? And I'll never forget how she responded to me. She said, you might be right. You make some good points. It might not work. We might not get the volunteers that we need to pray all day, every day in front of this abortion facility. But if the Lord wants this thing to happen, she said, I believe that he's going to send us the people to make it happen. And besides, she added, we've been out there an hour or two every day for a while, but I don't think the UW can withstand 40 straight days of us being out there all day, every day. Now, how could I argue with that? I couldn't. We did the 40 Days for Life Vigil, and my wife taught me a thing or two about trusting in the Lord that Lent, because not only did we fill every hour of our vigil schedule more easily than we ever had before, but the very next month, the state of Wisconsin revealed that plans to perform late-term abortions on that college campus had been scrapped once and for all. Now, I think if that were the only fruit of this entire year-and-a-half-long saga, that would be a mighty and tremendous act of God in and of itself. But our Lord had more in store for us. We saw the state of Wisconsin shortly thereafter enact a ban prohibiting the public university from ever revisiting such a scheme. We saw the architect of this abortion plan, the late-term abortionist herself, get frustrated, quit her job, pack her bags, and move off to Boston, leaving our Planned Parenthood short an abortion provider. We saw the number, as late-term abortion ended in Madison, and in fact in all of central Wisconsin, we saw the number of late-term abortions in this state drop like a rock. The following year, we saw the beginning of a significant and sustained drop in the number of total abortions in our state. In short, we recognized that we had some real momentum on our hands, and we couldn't afford to go back to the way things used to be. We couldn't let the momentum slip through our fingers. And so we launched what we called the 40 Days for Life 365 campaign, where now every day for more than a decade that Planned Parenthood in Madison has been open. We've had people out on that sidewalk praying, sidewalk counseling, witnessing to the dignity of human life. Some of our volunteers, they took that momentum in a slightly different direction. They noticed that the building across the street from Planned Parenthood was up for sale. And so they bought the property, and after a time of prayerful discernment, they opened up a women's care center designed to provide women in crisis with real options, with real health care, with real choice. They've got a chapel in there where the Lord is present in the Holy Eucharist at all times. It's always kind of funny. You see people out there praying, walking up and down the sidewalk, and then they turn and genuflect to the building across the street. I think passersby don't know what it's about, but we know, and we know the Lord sees us. All things considered, we've seen a lot of victories. We had a baby saved in Madison from abortion yesterday. We had a baby saved last week. I think one of the most abortion-friendly communities in the United States of America has become nothing less than a pro-life powerhouse. The Lord has done great things for us, and holy is his name. And I share this story as an example of what's happening here in our state. But the fact of the matter is, this is taking place all around the world, results just like this. I mentioned that the world came knocking. We've got a 40 Days for Life campaign taking place right now. We've been in all 50 states. We've got campaigns all throughout Latin America, Africa, Western Europe. Croatia has a 40 Days for Life vigil taking place in every city in the country right now. Lithuania, Romania, Slovenia, maybe a couple of other Anias that I can't remember off the top of my head. Australia, New Zealand, we've got one in Latvia. I don't even know where Latvia is, but I'm glad they come together to pray with us. Different countries, different cultures, different languages, but one shared language of prayer to our one Lord. I think more importantly than where this has gone, though, is what the Lord has done through it. Since 2007, when this thing went nationwide, we've seen more than 20,000 babies that we confirm have been saved from abortion through the presence of somebody out praying in front of an abortion business. Now, I think that's a great number. I think it is really an undershoot. I think it's a drop in the bucket, because former abortion workers who have converted and left their jobs report to us that using Planned Parenthood's own internal data, they say the no-show rate for these abortion appointments can go up to as high as 75% when there's somebody out praying in front of one of these businesses. And so that means that when somebody, maybe it's you, answers that call and goes out and spends 1 hour of prayer in front of an abortion facility, of every 4 children scheduled to lose their lives in that building, 3 of them may live to see to take their first breath, may live to go to kindergarten, to take gymnastics lessons or play Little League, learn the piano, go to high school, graduate, God willing, get married, and one day have children of their own, ensuring that the impact of 1 hour of prayer extends into the future for generations, and in fact extends into all eternity. I mentioned former abortion workers. We know of 229 of them that have experienced conversion, left their jobs, and begun a relationship with our Lord through a 40 Days for Life campaign. This is the number that gets me personally out of bed in the morning, because I'm not surprised when women choose life. We know they don't want to have an abortion. But look around our world, and what do we see? We see division, political division, racial division, economic division, social division. Everywhere we look, we see people at each other's throats. And here we have women and men who don't just support abortion on the intellectual level or that ideological level, they earn their entire livelihoods off of it. And when those women and men experience God's grace and they leave behind, they walk away from what is probably their family's sole source of income because it's the right thing to do, I think it goes to show that there is nobody beyond the reach of God's mercy. We also know of 114 different abortion facilities to close their doors and go out of business once and for all following a 40 Days for Life campaign. One of them's not far from here. The Dubuque facility closed a few years ago, and we're seeing more close all the time. The low-hanging fruit is gone, but we're still seeing abortion businesses close. And people, sometimes they're like, Steve, that's great stuff, and I'm sure that can work in Texas, where 40 Days for Life started. Maybe it can work in the Bible Belt or the so-called red states. That can't work where I'm from. Last year, we saw abortion facilities close after a 40 Days for Life campaign in Chicago, 2 of them in London, England, and drumroll please, Seattle, Washington. The Lord can close an abortion business in Seattle. There's nowhere that he can't work. We know that. My pro-life hero, my hero in life throughout this entire experience that I've shared with you is Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta. I love Mother Teresa so much that my first daughter is named Teresa in her honor. And I think everybody who has a devotion to Mother Teresa has their favorite Mother Teresa story. And mine concerns a British journalist who decades ago visited Mother Teresa's home for the dying in Calcutta, India. This is the place where Mother Teresa and her fellow sisters with the missionaries of charity tended to and cared for some of the poorest, most miserable people on the face of the earth. AIDS patients, lepers, the dying pulled out of the gutters of a filthy city to be cleaned up and treated with dignity as sons and daughters of God Almighty in their very last days or even moments on this earth. And this British journalist watched Mother Teresa as she tended to a very sick man. He was dying. He was covered in ulcers. He smelled terrible. This guy was disgusting in every way. And in a moment of complete, candid, and brutal honesty, this journalist looked at Mother Teresa and said, "Mother, I wouldn't do that for $1 million. And Mother Teresa responded, as I think only Mother Teresa could. She said, "Yeah, for $1 million, I wouldn't do it either. There are some things that nothing less than the love of Jesus Christ can compel us to do. And something that would be easy, that nobody would blame anybody for not doing. It's hard work to be pro-life. It's hard to stand for our pro-life convictions. I think about the people that I know through 40 Days for Life who are out on the sidewalks. You get ridiculed. You get persecuted. It's rare, but we've seen violence towards some of those people. I look at the people working in our pregnancy help centers, going into the office day after day, week after week, month after month, taking the hands of women who are so desperate, so filled with despair that they are seriously contemplating paying big money to have their children killed. What's our role in this mission? I don't know. It's a question we've got to ask ourselves. It's a question that I hope we all ask ourselves. But it reminds us, I think, if we've never thought of it this way, that we, as people of faith, as Catholics, as pro-lifers, we are called to be missionaries. And for most of my life, I sort of took it for granted that we don't need missionaries here, right? This is America. We're a Christian country. It says, "In God we trust," right on our money. We send missionaries to far off, seemingly God-forsaken places like Calcutta, India. But Mother Teresa's work inspired a lot of people. And some of them would very courageously reach out to Mother Teresa and offer to leave behind their lives of comfort and security and affluence and to join Mother Teresa serving the poorest of the poor in the slums of Calcutta. How do you think she responded to those heroic offers? I can tell you how I would have responded if I were in her place. I would have said, "Yes, absolutely. Come on over. Catch the next flight out. Do you have any friends that you can bring? We need all the volunteers that we can get here in Calcutta." But Mother Teresa's response was typically much different. Usually just a few words. She'd respond saying, "Go find your own Calcutta." And it's a reminder to us that we don't necessarily need to travel around the world to exotic places to bear the light of Christ, because the depths of darkness and despair found in the waiting room of an abortion facility are every bit as tragic, every bit as horrific as the darkness that you find in a place like Calcutta, India. Now, these are bad days for our world. Our society is sick. It's diseased. I don't think any of you will disagree with me or be surprised to hear me say that. But I think we've got no reason to get discouraged, and we've got no excuse for despair, because as bad as it is right now, unprecedented attacks on the dignity of human life, on marriage and the family, on people of faith and conscience, as awful as it all is, the world that we live in today, I don't think looks all that different from the world that Jesus Christ ministered to 2,000 years ago. The ancient pagan Roman Empire, no friend to human life. Abortion ran rampant, infanticide ran rampant, but our Lord knew that Caesar didn't have the last word. And that's why, as important as it is, and don't get me wrong, it is critically important. We need to elect righteous candidates to elected office who enact just laws that respect and reflect God's law, the natural moral law. That is critically important. But it's not what the Lord put first on our agenda. And that's why our Lord didn't send his disciples out 2 by 2 to lobby the Roman Senate. He sent them out 2 by 2 to preach the good news, to proclaim the gospel of God's love, hope, healing, mercy, and salvation to all mankind, to rescue lost souls, to pull lost women and lost men from the clutches of Satan, from the depths of the pits of hell, one at a time. In his ministry on earth, our Lord entered into and he shared in the sufferings of his people. And I think that he calls upon us, upon you and me, to do the same. Every woman from this community or from any other community who walks through the doors of our abortion facility in Madison or anywhere else, walks through those doors, every woman is carrying with her a darkness that is both very deep and very personal. Maybe it's the darkness of being a young woman on campus here who is terrified to come home on spring break and tell mom and dad that she's pregnant. Or maybe it's the darkness of the couple that's received a very difficult and challenging prenatal diagnosis, and they're being tempted or even pressured to have an abortion. Maybe it's the darkness of the woman walking back out through those doors, having had an abortion, quickly recognizing that the promise of relief from a crisis situation was an empty promise. But whatever darkness it is that leads a woman to walk through those doors, our Lord calls us, you and me, to enter into that darkness, bearing the light of Christ as a sign of God's hope and of his mercy. I love that verse that you always end the Latin Mass with. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not comprehended it. I think we're called to be that light of Christ shining in the darkness. And so I want to ask, I don't know what way it is, but I want to ask everybody here, get involved in some fashion. We've got the 40 Days for Life campaign going on in Madison through Palm Sunday. After Palm Sunday, we're out year-round, just not quite as many hours. But maybe you're called to come out and to pray. Maybe you're called to learn how to sidewalk counsel and to reach out to that woman at that last desperate moment. Maybe you're called to get involved in some educational outreaches and initiatives. Maybe you're called to volunteer for the local pregnancy help center. I don't know what it is, but the Lord has a mission for all of us in defending the least of our brothers and sisters. And one thing that each of us can do is to speak the truth. I think sometimes I find that pro-lifers are a little wary of being pro-life. I sometimes hear like, well, I'm pro-life, but I'm not one of those crazy pro-lifers, right? Or I'm not in favor of abortion, but I'm not going around bombing abortion clinics as though anybody really is, right? I don't think we should feel, on one hand, I get it. Our culture is so hostile to both our Lord and to his most precious gift of human life that sometimes it's tough. Nobody wants to be judged for being pro-life, and we don't want to be perceived as judgmental toward those who are having abortions. But at the same time, I don't think it's us who should be playing defense. I think it's those who suggest that it's a good thing or an okay thing to stop a human heart from beating that should be forced to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Anybody can speak the gospel of life. You don't need to be an expert. Anybody can learn a few basic facts. Maybe you share in conversation that the human heart begins beating at 18 days gestation, before women generally know they're pregnant, certainly before abortions are taking place. I saw some interesting research the other day. We were looking at some of the public opinion data to find out how do you market the pro-life message to young people. And a majority of young people reported that they're in favor of abortion being legal for the entire first trimester. A majority of millennials and Gen Z also reported that they are in favor of banning abortion once the heartbeat begins. Well, how does How do you rectify that? You're in favor of it for 3 months, but you're opposed to it after the first 18 days. The answer is just what I said before. People who support abortion don't know what they're talking about. And when we share facts like the heart begins beating at 18 days, it can change hearts and it can keep hearts from beating. It can keep hearts from stopping. It can keep hearts beating. We're going to learn a few other facts. What about, abortion in the case of where it's needed to save the life of the mother? You can dispel that easy in just a couple of sentences, too. You can share that as far back as 1965, Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who is known as the father of Planned Parenthood, said that when there's a life-threatening health emergency, there is no situation in which an abortion would be needed to save the life of a mother. In fact, actually, performing an abortion is just an obstacle and a delay in providing the real emergency health care that a woman in crisis facing a life-threatening emergency would need. Or maybe you get this, if you were really pro-life, you would be in favor of widely accessible contraception to prevent the unplanned pregnancies that lead to abortions. Well, maybe we can share with our friends and our family members who don't see the light yet that many forms of the most popular forms of birth control actually cause early abortions before a woman knows that she's pregnant. And that even for those forms of birth control that don't cause early abortions, there is no data. We're supposed to follow the science, right? We're looking to the numbers. There's no data that suggests that the widespread availability of contraception does anything to lower the abortion rate. In fact, there is Harvard-generated research put out, peer-reviewed by secular professionals that suggests that the widespread availability of contraception actually leads to riskier behaviors, increasing the abortion rate. You guys know this stuff. Everybody knows it. We just need to have the confidence to go out and to speak the truth. So I encourage you to do that. There's a long road ahead of us. I hope that we will see the Supreme Court strike down Roe v. Wade this summer. But I'm also convinced at the same time that even if they do, in a society that is drowning in contraception, a society that is drowning in pornography, that any battles that are won on the public policy front are transient. We need to change the culture. We hear a lot about changing hearts and minds. We need to make sure it's not a cliche. We need to go out and do the hard work, the heavy lifting of teaching people the truth about the goodness of human life, about the generosity of our Lord who provides and makes every life worth living. We need to speak about the harms of abortion. We need to quit pitting moms against their babies, recognizing that abortion harms them both and life is an option that both can live with. We need to fight the good fight. We need to finish the race. We need to keep the faith, and we need to continue to bring the light of Christ to those in our community who so desperately need it. And I'm looking at the clock here on the thermostat. It says I'm at my 40 minutes, and so I know we wanted to leave. Brad, I think you said time for Q&A. So I'm happy to take questions. If you've got a question about anything I said, about anything pro-life that's unrelated to anything I said, or if you want to stump the pro-life guy with what about this hard case scenario, the left-handed immigrant who's 13 years old who needs an abortion, you can throw those at me too. We hear them all the time, right? So who's got the first question?
If you want to visit the 40 Days for Life and sign up for an hour, how do you do that?
Sure. I'm going to get a drink and then I'll answer. The question is, if you want to get involved in 40 Days for Life, go pray for an hour and maybe save 3 out of every 4 babies that are scheduled to be aborted. In Madison, we've got a local website, vigilforlife.org, vigilforlife.org. It is not a good website. There are some things that are, quite dated on it, but there's a vigil calendar that allows you to sign up, and that thing works pretty good. So you can sign up there during these 40 days or even after they end. I don't know if that's their closest location, but if you want to find the 40 Days for Life location nearest you, just go to 40daysforlife.com/location, and it'll pull up whatever's nearest you wherever you live. Father.
You just talk a little bit, because you're right about the data thing. It doesn't take much to know a little bit and realize how much people don't know what they're talking about. But people say, well, before abortion was legalized, do you realize that 20,000 people a year women would die from botched abortion? And that was made up. That was never a thing, right? Do you know that story about that data? And it's good to know because people, they think it's real,
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat the question in case the acoustics seem awesome in here, but if anyone didn't hear or for anyone on the live stream, the question is, how do you respond to the abortion supporters who say, well, women are going to get abortions anyway. We need to make it safe. We need to make it legal, because if we don't, we know that before Roe v. Wade, there were tens of thousands of women dying every year from these unsafe, back alley, botched abortions. And there's a lot that we can say to answer that. The first is that claim that women were dying in large numbers, that they were having abortions in large numbers in the first place, but subsequently that women were dying or being maimed and mutilated through botched abortions in large numbers, was fabricated whole cloth. It's a complete fraud. There's no truth to it whatsoever. We can just call that out, say, actually, that number's not true. Where'd you get it from? Where that number came from is from a doctor named Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who founded an organization called NARAL, which to this day remains the sort of most prevalent and insidious pro-abortion lobbying organization in our country. Dr. Nathanson founded it. He then saw an abortion performed via ultrasound and became pro-life. He remained an atheist, but the witness of pro-lifers changed his heart on the existence of God as well, and he became a Catholic, was baptized in the cathedral in New York City back in the 90s. He's since passed away just a few years ago. But after he became pro-life, he admitted, he said, look, we made these numbers up entirely. We knew that they would change people's hearts on abortion. Oh, we don't want women dying in botched back alley abortions, so we'll just say tens of thousands of them are dying every year to abortion. And he said the media couldn't swallow it quickly enough. They loved it. It was exactly what the media wanted to report, and so it went without any speculation. You know, the fact checkers aren't doing a good job these days, and they didn't do a good job back in 1973. And so they were able to kind of place these claims. What's interesting to me, too, about that is you'll hear about these so-called back alley abortions. The majority of doctors who were doing illegal abortions before abortion was legalized were themselves physicians. Let's contrast that today, where we have seen states like California legalize non-doctors, non-physicians performing abortions. People without a medical degree authorized to perform abortions, where we see the rollout of webcam abortions just in Iowa. Iowa is the state that pioneered it, where a woman doesn't even see a doctor except over a webcam, and then is taking this dangerous abortion drug cocktail. And with no, they'd say abortion's a matter between a woman and her doctor, but there's no doctor. Even the doctors who perform abortions, that's not that woman's doctor. That is a mercenary. The doctors who have left their jobs admit that. They don't want to know the patient's name, and often they don't want the patient to know their name. So we see this, not just the webcam abortions, but the US FDA has used the pandemic to roll out a mail order abortion scheme, where Planned Parenthood had a trial system, 18 states where you can go on and order your mail order abortion. They're trying to become like the Amazon of abortion. What happens when there's complications? It's called patient abandonment. Any other realm of medicine, you abandon a patient like that, and you're gonna get your license suspended. In abortion, it's standard of care. We even have now doctors who are prescribing abortion pills to women who aren't even pregnant, so they can have it on a rainy day, is what they say. So all of it's not true. Women were safer before abortion was made legal, and they're in greater danger than ever as we continue to see abortion law liberalized in our country and in other places around the world.
Are there any numbers about the botched abortions and so-called safe abortions?
Great question. Are there any numbers about the number of botched abortions in the so-called safe, legal abortion facilities? And the answer is nothing that's reliable. This is an important point to know, because sometimes you'll have abortion supporters say, hey, look at this study which shows that abortion is safer than childbirth. Okay, they may be able to roll out that data, but what they're not saying is that many, if not most, of the abortions that lead to severe medical emergencies for women are not listed as emergencies. The doctor says, okay, if something goes wrong, take this pill, or you've got the surgery. If something goes wrong, go to the emergency room and tell them you're having a miscarriage. Now, many, if not most, women don't want to admit that they're having an abortion in the first place, so you've got a lot of people showing up and saying, oh, I'm having a miscarriage, but it's actually a botched abortion. We don't know exactly how often that takes place. We've got a little bit of better data from the abortion pill, because there's data out that shows that if you take the abortion pill, which is what Planned Parenthood is really focusing on right now, because their profit margin is substantially higher on this abortion pill, but 10% of women who take that abortion pill experience immediate complications, 20% of which are life-threatening. You don't hear this from the abortion industry. Safe, legal, they repeat it, but there's no data that suggests it whatsoever. And that's just physical health. There's a lot of different, the list of physical problems that women experience after abortion is endless, but you also see a massive, I think it was 81% increase in mental health risk to women who are having a mental health emergency after having an abortion. Our country has talked, and rightly so, a great deal about focusing on improving mental health. Abortion is a disaster for it. And if a woman already has a particular mental health problem, the odds that she commits suicide, attempts suicide, through the roof. Every social indicator is worse after an abortion. Drug abuse, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, child abuse, being the victim of domestic abuse. Women are much more likely to die of any reason after an abortion. It just leads to worse outcomes all the way around. So I wish I had a specific number for you. All I can say is no, the abortion industry is lying about it, so we don't get the real numbers. We do have a little bit of data that shows that 10% after the abortion pill lead to complications immediately. Have we worked with Project Veritas? Not directly. There's a lot of great folks who are doing some undercover research. David Daleiden with the Center of Medical Progress exposed the baby body part trafficking scandal 7 years ago. Hard to believe it's been that long. That caused Planned Parenthood's donations to collapse. Now, they make it up in many cases in taxpayer funding, but their donor base even said enough is enough to that. Lila Rose in Live Action has done some great undercover research, but we haven't done it ourselves. We've shared it. We've encouraged the proliferation of the investigations for people to be more aware of them and for them to take it to their elected officials and share with them the treachery that the abortion industry is doing, but it's not something that we do directly ourselves at 40 Days.
You guys ever engage bishops to come out for the 40 days of life and prayer? Just as the holders of the keys, I would think their prayers would be very effective.
Yeah, great question. And the question again is, have we ever had engaged bishops to come out and pray? Each 40 Days for Life campaign is organized at the local level, and so that generally falls to the local leader. And so our local leadership team here in the Madison Diocese, Bishop Morlino was fantastic. He did whatever we asked. Bishop Hying follows in that same tradition, does whatever we ask. I know Archbishop Listecki made an unannounced visit out to pray at the abortion facility in Milwaukee on Wednesday as we kicked off on day one. We've gotten endorsements from Pope Francis, from Pope Benedict. We've had Cardinal Burke has shown up at 40 Days for Life vigils, and so we don't have necessarily a coordinated effort, but we reach out and we work with a lot of different bishops to the best extent we can, and we do that what we can nationally, but then at the local level too is where you see a lot of the actual fruits, boots on the ground of it. So we've had a lot of success. There's only a couple bishops, I think, who have refused to support us, and I think, I'm not going to name names, but I think even both of them, kind of when they learned what 40 Days for Life was truly about, peaceful law-abiding, I think even they said, oh, okay, great, didn't know that.
I know a lot of times in these movements, you always have these ideas of how you can do more, you can go bigger, so you're always trying to do more and get bigger. I'm just kind of curious if, if you and your wife, you and the other people that are involved, have different ideas about how to go bigger, different dreams about the stuff you want to do.
Sure, the question is, how do we go bigger? And we often at 40 Days for Life talk about sort of our ethos is we want mission expansion without mission dilution. It's very easy to see groups get kind of sidetracked by something that's tangentially related to the cause of defending unborn life, but kind of just leads to a wild goose chase. And so we look to mission expansion. So we've done that the last couple of years. In 2021, we launched, we started here locally first, but we launched worldwide what we called that 365, 40 Days for Life 365 initiative. People say, well, why just 40 days? Well, it's an entry point. If you say you've got the whole year to get involved, people put it off. If you say you've got 40 days, it creates that sense of urgency that gets people out on the street during those 40 days. And what happens then? They come back. They recognize that there are still moms and babies in danger on day 41, and they continue to come back and pray. And so we've created sort of the infrastructure and a training to facilitate that going year-round. We've got dozens of cities that are on board, and I expect we'll have more coming on board in the year to come. This year, we launched a new initiative called 40 Days for Life University, and the first offering through it is sidewalk counseling, empowering people to have that what we call the most important conversation in the world, the conversation with a mom before she walks into the abortion facility to make the very worst decision of her life. And so we've put out a 6-part online video-based training module to teach people how to do that. And we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them sign up and complete it just since January 1st. So we're pretty excited about that. What's next? I'm not exactly sure what the next way that we expand is. We're kind of looking at making those two things as robust as we can before we add something new. Brad, did you have another question? I think I saw your hand going up.
I was just gonna ask, kind of a off-the-wall spiritual question. Do you ever have exorcism prayers prayed for the abortion?
Question is, do we ever have exorcism prayers prayed at the abortion facilities? Yes, that has happened. I think of one time we had 4 priests, I think, praying the 4 corners of the Madison abortion facility. And I don't know if it was related or just a fluke thing, but one of the buildings nearby, a door just flew open. It was locked, it was shut, the building wasn't open, and the door just flew open. I don't know if that's some sort of spiritual activity, but it certainly happened. We know there's a lot of spiritual activity, both good and bad, both angelic and demonic at abortion facilities. So we don't have necessarily a plan. I don't know a ton about how the exorcism prayers work. I think in many cases it requires the permission of a bishop. I don't know exactly how that works, but I know we've had locations that have done it, including in Madison. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have a 800 phone number available that someone could be counseled 24/7?
So we ourselves do not, but we refer to those who do. This is sort of the area where we talk about mission expansion rather than mission dilution. There are many great groups that have these pregnancy help resources available 24 hours a day. So we list to them on our website, and 866-705-6788. I don't know if anyone, no, probably nobody had their pen and paper out, but you can go to 40daysforlife.com, and we've got a menu bar across the top, and it says resources, and it's one of the things on the drop-down menu. So critical. You know, we save lives. We couldn't do it without the robust pregnancy help centers, those resources that are available. Most women who get abortions don't know that those resources exist. 79% don't know that there are abortion alternatives available, and when they do, they choose life. I mean, not in all cases, but in many.
One argument I've heard is that abortion clinics not only do abortions but provide women's health care. Do you happen to know the percentage of other health care versus abortions that they do?
Sure. The question is, what about? I'll rephrase it in a way that I know you wouldn't put it. You know, abortion's just one thing that they do. What about all the other good services that Planned Parenthood provides? For years, Planned Parenthood has said that only 3% of their services are abortion. I think they've upped that number to 4%. My question is always, if you send your kid to a school and they had nutritious snacks and vibrant, robust extracurricular activities, and they only spent 3% of their time harming the children in their care, you wouldn't say, what about all the other good stuff that they do? You would pull your child out of that school, and you would have that rotten school shut down. So I don't think that's a good answer. But to specifically answer your question, Planned Parenthood will say 4%. Former abortion workers have sort of shared that they're kind of cooking the books on that. Like if you turn your head sideways and squint, you can come up with a way that suggests that it's only 3 or 4%. What we do know is that in any given year, 12% of Planned Parenthood's clients have abortions. 0% of them have mammograms. Very few of them are getting like real actual women's health care. There's a lot of contraception, which is not real health care. There's a lot of sexually transmitted disease screening, which I suppose is real health care, but it doesn't justify the shedding of innocent blood. You've got almost no adoption referrals. They talk about providing adoptions. All they do is give you a flyer and say, here, you're on your own, most of the time. So yeah, I guess to answer your question directly, 12% of their clients get an abortion in a given year. But if they send someone home with an abortion and a year's supply of birth control, they're counting an abortion as 1/12 or 1/13 of the services that have been provided. So I think that's the best I can do on that question. I know we're running up on time here. Anyone have one last question? I'll make, if you'll allow me, a little selfish and self-promotional plug here, which is Father referenced my books. I brought them. One of them is called This Is When We Begin to Fight. That one was endorsed by Cardinal Burke and some other great folks, Bishop Olmsted out in Phoenix. And it's sort of the story that I told you in my talk, but a little deeper into the weeds, a little more personal, a little more profound in the journey. That one's $10 if you'd like to get it on the way out. We also have What to Say When, the complete new guide to discussing abortion. This one's $15, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'd love to send you home with a copy or two of each of them if you would like, and we'll have them out in the, I don't know what the room that I would normally call a lobby is called in a church, but gathering space, I don't know. But thank you so much for taking the time to come. You've been a very gracious audience. I'm grateful for your questions, and if you have any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to ask me afterwards. And thank you, Father, so much for hosting.
All right, Steve, thank you so much for your work. It's very consoling to know that there's somebody who speaks even quicker than I do. So thank you for being here. Pro-life is not the strongest thing we do here at Blackville and amongst the student community. So it's something we need to definitely put more effort. And I'm excited what Steve said about the counseling thing, about the university campus presence, because this is ground zero, right, for everything. And this is the future, so if you can change people's minds here, there'll be change for the rest of their lives. So let's say a prayer for that, please, during this Lent. Steve, thank you for your work. Next month, we'll be talking about the Mass. We'll be talking about the Latin Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass, the change, the differences, and we'll be going through the Latin Mass. So that'll be next Friday. I talked to John Salza yesterday, and he's going to be giving a talk this fall about the SSP Act. So excited about that as well. We have a great series going. So we'll be here every first Friday. Please join us next month. Thank you all for coming.